the attitudes about college really began to change. Um, in the 1940s, really in the 1950s, when college became this huge thing. Everybody wanted to sort of send their children to college. The this sort of explosion of this sort of suburban America, right? The growth of communities and societies outward from within this kind of centralized urban core regions, and we saw this explosion in suburban expansion. And it's kind of hard to say, exactly sort of who's to blame. A lot can be said about. I think there was a dark kind of malevolent force creeping beneath the surface within America for a very, very long time. This was even before World War II, because I think that there was some subversive actors inside the United States for decades. And what really, really did it and was core. We can't. What happened? What was happening in the 1960s with respect to the Vietnam War cannot be understated, because that changed America and changed society a lot. Because you know the students who were in fact in college at the time, and this is you talk about people just so heavily credentialed, went to school, got degrees on degrees on degrees, didn't want to leave, and that had a lot to do with what was going on in Vietnam, because a lot of young people at the time who didn't know suffering the way their parents did. They didn't live through the Great Depression and these various things. We for the first time, and remember, after World War II is when the United States became the leading global hegemon beyond the British Empire, because the British Empire had faltered up until that point. Heck, without the United States and our involvement in World War II, the Axis powers may very well have won that war. And it was the United States that had taken over after World War II. And so you had the generation, the baby boomer generation who came after the greatest generation. They didn't have the same sense of pride and patriotism for country that their forefathers did and their foremothers. And so once they got to college, in order to avoid enlistment, they stayed in college. And a lot of them just never left. They stayed in college and they got jobs. And this is the other crazy thing, bro. This is another crazy thing. Because a lot of times, with these useless degrees, the only thing that you can do is, because you may be smart in that field, right? You got specialized training in that particular field. So the only thing that you can do is get a job to teach people what you know. So you're teaching that. So you get how the cycle is kind of, right? It's repeating itself, because the people who got the educations remained in education, kept educating, and they were the ones who selected who would be the next crop of educators. So it was sort of like a revolution through hiring committee. They just stayed in college. That's deep that you asked that question, bro, because mm, not even a year, maybe a few months ago, I probably would have told you that I have 100% confidence in the United States military, that if, for example, if we were to have a full-on hot military collision with China, that we would win. I'm not so sure about that anymore. Um, I don't know. I really don't know, because we have a problem here in the United States, and every sector of American life is being affected. Our military, our schools, I mean everything. I mean, it. We are being, and this is the thing when it comes to um, um, China, and I have to bring up China because say we're talking about a potential military confrontation. You see, that's what bankrupted the Soviet Union, right? It was the arms race, to put it shortly, to put it in a nutshell, right? The Soviet Union went about confronting the liberal West in a totally different manner. China wanted to do it differently because China took the path of let's just say cultural subversion over full-fledged military confrontation. And so when our enemies, when we sit back, and I'm gonna get back to the question more directly, but I also just want to say this: when we are fussing and fighting with one another, when we're running around talking about diversity, inclusion, and what's the other one? Diversity, inclusion, equity. When we're running around talking about this, our enemies are laughing at us. You notice how this was last year, I think some representatives from the Biden administration were being publicly chided and criticized by officials from China about our human rights record and the way we abuse minorities and the way we do such and so on and so forth. Because the United States is now being told that we no longer have the moral high ground, that we don't have the authority to criticize our enemies because of what we do to our own citizens. Look at us. And for the longest time, communists have always known that race was America's sweet spot. And they knew that by exploiting our racial acrimony that they could demoralize the society from within. So our enemies, they sit back and they laugh at us. So I don't know. It's very tough because you don't really. I mean, sort of like Abraham Lincoln once famously said that the only way that the United States will crumble is if it will crumble from within, or something to that effect. And that is exactly what is taking place. But a lot of that anti-American propaganda is being, funneled in and pumped into our system by outlets and avenues that are in fact controlled and ran by the Chinese Communist Party. So can we, or do we still have the baddest military? I'm not trying to evade the question. I really don't know anymore, because China in its Belt and Road Initiative, China is, and now we used to have a kind of coalition amongst countries here in the West, but now the West in its oligarchs and a lot of its politicians are now open to doing business with China, and everything has kind of went topsy-turvy. Once upon a time, around in the early 20, it just as recently as the early 21st century, this was right around the time when China was introduced to the World Trade Organization, because China had been on the outs looking in. But 75% of global trade once upon a time went through the United States. Now 75% of the world's global trade goes through China. Everything has flipped, it has went upside down. We used to be the big dog. Now we're down here because everyone's trading with China now. And China has maneuvered itself and positioned itself brilliantly. And to make a long story short, I mean, China has a lot of strategic positioning, even if it would come to a military confrontation, because of everything that they've done with their Belt and Road Initiative. People, as an aside, I want to say this too. For example, people are always stressing this shit about getting us off of fossil fuels, which is completely asinine, because of course the planet, we need to save the planet, right? So you need, in order to run those EVs, as they call them, electric vehicles, one of the key elements used to power electric vehicles is cobalt. It's funny because all you hear about is how America or some Western country is exploiting the poor peoples of the world and taking their resources. Why is the Democrat Party so keen on getting everyone on electrical vehicles, when in fact that the majority, 70 to 75% of the world's cobalt is found in or is extracted from one country, and that's the Democratic Republic of the Congo? If any of you had any idea what goes on in Congo to those people with the sort of complacency of their own African leadership, it will make you want to throw up for all of my pro-righteous, all my righteous power to the people. I love Africa motherfuckers out there. But guess what? Who the Congolese, when they extract the cobalt, guess where the cobalt has to be shipped in order to be refined for usage? It goes to China. So when these people, because China damn near owns all of the Congo's infrastructure. So when these motherfuckers running around trying to force y'all in the electrical vehicles, once again, the Chinese have cornered the market on cobalt. Therefore, the more we skip over oil, natural gas, any type of, we're just enriching our enemies.